Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but last night something happened that made me question every star I've ever trusted. It started like any other Friday. My buddy Ethan lives 3 miles down the road in a quiet suburban sprawl outside Charlotte, the kind of place where everyone's lawn is suspiciously green and porch lights flicker off by 10 p.m. sharp. I've driven those winding streets so often I could do it blindfolded, past the Kroger with its flickering sign, the dented fire hydrant at the corner of Maple, the old Henderson house with its sagging willow tree. Familiarity was my armor, until it wasn't. We'd planned to stargaze. Ethan's backyard is a half-acre of patchy grass, bordered by woods so thick they swallow headlights. I parked at 9:15 p.m., my tires crunching over gravel still damp from a morning rain. The air smelled like cut grass and distant barbecue. Normal. Safe. Clear as a damn window tonight, Ethan said, handing me a beer. He wasn't wrong. The sky was empty. Not a cloud. Not even the usual smear of light pollution. Just black velvet, pricked with white. My cheap telescope sat between us like a third friend. The first flash came without warning. It erupted from the woods behind Ethan's house. A burst of white light so sudden I dropped my bottle. Glass shattered, foam pooling around my sneakers. The sound was wrong. Not a crack, not a pop, just silence. Like the world had blinked. Heat lightning? Ethan squinted, shielding his eyes. I shook my head. My throat felt dry. No clouds. We checked our phones. The radar showed nothing but a moon icon grinning back. No storms, no anomalies, just a flat line of calm. Ethan laughed, kicking his feet up on the patio table. Aliens, man. They finally came for the Hendersons' weird-ass lawn gnomes. I forced a chuckle, but the pit in my stomach didn't budge. The air tasted metallic, like licking a battery. I rubbed my tongue against my teeth, but the bitterness clung. 15 minutes later, the red one appeared. This wasn't light, it was liquid. A thick, arterial crimson that pulsed east of us, beyond the neighbor's oak tree. We turned in unison, necks cricking. "What the hell is that?" Ethan whispered. The red light flickered again. 5 seconds later, the white one answered. Then red. White. Red. White. A pattern, a conversation. My skin prickled. The metallic tang sharpened, curdling into something rotten. The moment, spoiled milk. Rot. I gagged. "You feel that?" Ethan said suddenly. He gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles blanching. "It's heavy, like the air's made of wet concrete." He was right. The night pressed down on us, cold and thick. Even sitting, my lungs strained. A new light joined, white like the first, but south now. It hovered above the tree line, pulsing in sync with the others. Red, white, white, red. A code, a countdown. Then the noise began. A low whirring, like machinery buried deep underground. Not loud, not yet, but steady. Relentless. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair screeching against concrete. The crickets, they stopped. He was right, the woods had gone mute. No frogs, no rustling leaves, just that whirring. And dogs. Every dog in the neighborhood howling at once. A sound I'd never heard. Not fear, not anger. Desperation. We tried to film it. Ethan fumbled with his iPhone, swearing as the screen glitched. "It's not picking up the lights, just black." "Let me try," I said. But my hands shook too badly. The whirring drilled into my temples. Static fizzed in my ears. When I checked my phone later, there were gaps in my photo reel. 10:07 p.m. to 10:13 p.m. Nothing but blurry darkness. 6 minutes. Gone. I left. Cowardly? Maybe. But my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Ethan didn't argue. "Text me when you're back," he muttered, eyes glued to the sky. The road home felt longer. Shadows stretched like claws across the asphalt. Every streetlight hummed too loudly, and the flashes, they followed. In my rearview mirror, I watched them ascend. Red, white, white, climbing higher than any plane. When I rolled down the window, the whirring drilled into my skull. My phone died halfway, battery icon blinking red. Of course, I took a wrong turn. Maple Street was blocked. Orange cones flashing construction lights. My tires squealed as I swerved onto Elm. The detour forced me past the old train yard, its rusted tracks glinting under the moon. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall, too tall, standing motionless between the boxcars, its head tilted, tracking my car. I floored the gas. The whirring spiked, vibrating through my molars. My neighborhood was silent too. No crickets, no owls, just Mrs. Langley's terrier yapping behind her fence, paws scrabbling at wood. I sprinted inside, deadbolted the door, and wrote this. But here's the thing. They're still outside. The flashes hover above my roof now. Red, white, white, red. The whirring's louder. I tried filming them, but my phone just shows black. Maybe you'll hear the noise in the recording. Maybe not. And the taste, God, the taste. Metal and something else. Spoiled milk. Rot. It came 3 times. Soft. Patient. Tap. 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 Not the door. The window. I didn't look. I'm not stupid. But I heard it. A wet, clicking breath against the glass. Mrs. Langley's dog stopped barking. My phone buzzed. 1% battery. A text from Ethan. They're in my house. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. They started upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. Bare feet dragging over hard wood. I'm in the basement now. The whirring's so loud my teeth ache. I found footprints in the dew this morning. Small. Barefoot. Leading to my window. The flashes are gone, but the whirring hasn't stopped. I checked the footage. The audio's just static, but last night I woke up to a shadow in my hallway. It didn't move, didn't breathe. When I reached for the light, it was gone. The metallic taste is back. I think it's watching. Redditor 2. I've never told anyone this, not even my therapist, but what happened on Lake Huron last summer wasn't just a UFO sighting. It wasn't a flare or a drone or some prank by bored cottagers. It was wrong. The kind of wrong that leaves a film on your skin like motor oil you can't scrub off. The kind that makes you sleep with the lights on for a year. It started on our 3rd night at the Ontario cabin. My boyfriend, Greg, and I had driven up from Toronto with his dad and stepmom, Marie, a sharp-egged nurse who laughed like a shotgun and wore neon pink Crocs everywhere. The cabin was her idea. Nature resets the soul, she'd declared, though I suspect it was really to distract Greg's dad from the divorce papers his ex had mailed that spring. The place was classic Canadian kitsch. Wood paneling, mothball-scented quilts, and a porch swing that groaned like a dying animal. But the lake. God, the lake. At night, it went black as crude oil, swallowing the stars whole. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We'd just finished dinner, shard burgers and store-bought potato salad, when Marie shouted from the deck, "Kids, get out here, now!" Greg dropped his beer. Marie didn't yell, not like that. We found her barefoot at the water's edge, head craned back, Crocs abandoned in the mud. "Look," she hissed, pointing. At first I thought it was the moon. But the moon doesn't burn orange. The light hung high above the lake, perfectly still, not flickering, not pulsing. A single, unwavering ember, like a cigarette tip pressed against glass. It cast a sickly glow on the water, turning the waves the color of old pennies. "Flare?" Greg said, but his voice wavered. Marie shook her head. "Flares don't hover, and they damn sure don't last 40 minutes. 40 minutes? That's how long we stood there, necks stiff, mosquitoes feasting on our ankles. The light didn't move, didn't dim, it just watched. That's when I noticed the silence. No loons, no frogs. Even the wind had died. The only sound was Greg's dad muttering, "Goddamn kids with their drones," as he fumbled with his DSLR camera. But when he tried to snap a photo, the screen stayed black. "Battery's dead," he grumbled. "Charged it this morning." Greg pulled out his phone. "Mine too, 0%. So did mine. So did Marie's. We didn't talk about that." Then the second light appeared, lower this time, maybe 1,000 feet above the lake. Same hellish orange. It drifted upward, slow as a soap bubble, until it hovered directly beneath the first. Greg's dad laughed. A thin, reedy sound. Trick of the eye. Heat refraction, or swamp gas. "Swamp gas," Marie snapped. "We're on a granite basin, you idiot." The lights pulsed once, in unison. That's when the smell hit me. Burnt hair. Melted plastic. My eyes watered. Greg gagged. "You smell that?" Marie didn't answer. She was staring at the water. The lake wasn't reflecting the lights anymore. It was glowing. Faint at first, then brighter. as if something beneath the surface had switched on a floodlight. The orange rippled outward, staining the rocks, the dock, our faces. Greg's dad stumbled back. "Get inside, now!" But we couldn't move. The two lights began to twist, like snakes coiling around each other. No, not twist. Merge. Their edges blurred, molten gold bleeding into a single searing point. Then they vanished. Not like a light switch, like a TV screen glitching. One frame they were there, the next gone. The lake went dark. We didn't sleep. Greg's dad poured whiskey into mismatched mugs, hands shaking. Marie chain-smoked on the deck, staring at the sky. At dawn, we drove into town for supplies and found the gas station buzzing. "You see it too?" the cashier asked, leaning across the counter. Her name tag said Marge. "Big orange bastard over the lake. Whole beach saw it, called the cops and everything." Greg's dad turned gray. "What'd they say?" Marge snorted. "Said it was probably a Chinese lantern." I said, "Since when do lanterns freeze in mid-air for an hour?" They hung up. Back at the cabin, we found the dock covered in dead fish. Perch, mostly. Their eyes were milky, gills streaked with that same burnt orange. Greg poked one with a stick. "What the hell?" Marie called the Ministry of Natural Resources. They never called back. That should have been the end of it. But 2 nights later, I woke up to something scraping against the bedroom window. Not branches. Not animals. Something deliberate. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Greg snored beside me. The clock read 3:07 a.m. I told myself it was the wind. Then I heard the humming, low, vibrating, like a power line about to snap. It came from the lake. The window faced the shore. I told myself not to look. I looked. The orange light was back, closer now. So close I could see the texture, not smooth but scaly, like a reptile's belly. It pulsed once. Something pulsed back inside my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My ribs were vice grips, crushing my lungs. The light pulsed again. My heart stuttered, skipped, then raced. Greg stirred. "Babe, you okay?" The second he touched me, the pressure vanished. So did the light. We left the next morning. Greg's dad didn't argue. But here's what I didn't tell them. The night after we got home, I found orange streaks under my fingernails. I scrubbed until my hands bled. A week later, my Fitbit recorded a heart rate of 220 BPM while I slept. And last month, I missed my period. The doctor said it's stress, but I dream about the lake. Every night. In the dreams, I'm standing on the dock. In the wake room, you find the exit from the garage, which, when they hit it, you can slow down and walk on the beach. The orange light is inches from my face. It doesn't burn, it peels, layer after layer, until I'm raw, until I'm nothing. And somewhere in the dark, something hums. Redditor 3. I've never told anyone this before, but I can't get that night in October 2007 out of my mind. It's been haunting me for years, and I think putting it into words might help. Or maybe not. Maybe it'll just make it worse. It started as a normal evening. We were in Sausalito, California, sitting on the deck of this little restaurant overlooking the bay. The kind of place where the wine is overpriced, but the view makes you forget about it. I was halfway through a glass of Chardonnay when someone gasped. A woman, maybe in her 40s, seated a few tables over. Then, slowly, the whole deck went quiet. Forks and knives stopped clinking. The low hum of conversation dissolved into silence, and everyone turned to look at the sky. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual night sky over the bay, pinpricked with stars. But then, there, little dots of light, like fireflies flickering and moving in patterns I couldn't quite follow. They zipped back and forth, changing colors. Blue, red, green, and white. It wasn't fireworks, and it definitely wasn't planes. The way they moved was deliberate, precise, too fast, too sharp for anything I could explain. "They're drones," someone whispered. But even they didn't sound convinced. This was 2007. Drones weren't exactly flying around for fun back then. The lights danced for what felt like forever. Time stretched. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. I honestly couldn't tell you. All I know is that I couldn't look away. My heart was pounding, but not in fear. It was awe. Like watching something you're not supposed to see, something sacred and otherworldly. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights vanished. just blinked out, leaving the sky dark and empty again. The murmurs started immediately. A few people laughed nervously, the kind of laugh you let out when you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine. A couple of guys at the bar were already theorizing, military experiment, aliens, light show for some rich guy's party. None of it felt right. We finished dinner in a weird, dazed silence. I didn't even touch my dessert, and I never leave a creme brulee unfinished. As we paid the bill and walked to the car, I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting the lights to come back, but they didn't. The drive back to San Francisco was eerie. The Golden Gate Bridge loomed ahead of us. Its towers lit up like beacons against the dark. Traffic was heavier than usual, and at first I thought it was just because of the dinner rush. But then I noticed the cars ahead pulling over, one by one, drivers stepping out and pointing toward Angel Island. The island was on fire. At least that's what it looked like. Flames licked at the trees, casting an orange glow that reflected off the water. Smoke billowed upward, but there was something off about it. It wasn't moving like normal smoke, you know? It was too thick, too dark, and it seemed to coil around itself like it had a mind of its own. Campers? I said, though my voice shook. I already knew that didn't make sense. Camping was allowed on the island, sure, but fires weren't. Everyone knew that. No way, my boyfriend Matt muttered. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I don't know what that is. We parked on the side of the road like everyone else and joined the growing crowd of onlookers. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and salt, and there was this strange buzzing sound, faint but constant, like a swarm of bees just out of sight. People around us were whispering, speculating, but no one moved any closer to the bridge railing. It was like some unspoken force was keeping us all rooted in place. And then we saw them. The lights. The same ones we'd watched earlier over the bay. They rose from the island, swirling up through the smoke, their colors even brighter against the fiery backdrop. But this time, they didn't dance. They moved with purpose, circling each other in tight, almost predatory patterns. I swear I heard a low hum as they ascended, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest, making my teeth ache. Someone behind me whispered, "What the hell is that?" Before anyone could answer, the lights shot out in all directions. A few went high into the sky, disappearing into the stars, while others zipped toward the shoreline and vanished among the trees. One of them, a bright pulsating red, shot straight toward the bridge. Toward us. People screamed. A woman shoved her kids behind her, and a man dropped his phone as he scrambled back to his car. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink, as the light came closer and closer. It stopped maybe 50 feet away, hovering in the air like it was watching us. My throat tightened, and I tasted copper on my tongue. I forced myself to breathe, once, twice, but my legs felt like lead. All I could do was stare. And then it blinked out. Just like that, it was gone. The buzzing stopped, the smoke over the island started to dissipate, and the fire seemed to dim. Not die out exactly, just fade, as if someone had turned down a dial. Within minutes, the island was dark again, its silhouette barely visible against the night sky. No one said a word. Slowly, people began drifting back to their cars, the way you might leave a funeral. I don't even remember getting back to the car myself, but the next thing I knew, Matt was driving us home, his hands shaking on the wheel. "Was that?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those lights, felt that hum vibrating in my chest. And when I did manage to drift off, I dreamed of the island, of the fire, of something moving through the trees, its shadow stretching impossibly long against the flames. The next day, I scoured the news for any mention of what we'd seen. There was nothing. No reports of fires on Angel Island, no strange lights over the bay. It was like it had never happened. But I know what I saw. I know it was real. And every so often, on clear nights when the air feels just a little too still, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of light, a quick flash of red or blue. I still don't know what it was, but I do know this. Whatever we saw that night wasn't meant for us. And sometimes I think it's still out there, watching, waiting. Redditor 4. I've never been able to shake what happened that night. It's one of those memories you question over and over, wondering if it was real or just your imagination playing tricks on you. But no matter how many times I try to explain it away, I always come back to the same conclusion. It happened. I was 12, maybe 13, hanging out at my buddy Derek's house. He lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, one of those neighborhoods where every house looks the same and the biggest excitement is the ice cream truck rolling through in summer. That night, though, was different. We'd been riding bikes, bouncing between a few friends' houses, killing time before curfew. It was dark, maybe around 9 or 10, and the streets were mostly empty, just the two of us, pedaling under the glow of the occasional street lamp. We were coming down the last stretch to Derek's house when we saw it. A disc. It was massive, easily 200 feet across, and just sitting there, hovering over the woods at the end of the street. A perfect circle of white light, so bright it almost hurt to look at, but somehow it didn't light up anything around it. The trees, the ground, the houses, none of it reflected the glow. It was like the light didn't belong here, like it wasn't part of this world. Derek slammed on his brakes first, and I skidded to a stop right beside him. We both dropped our feet to the pavement, straddling our bikes, staring up at the thing with our mouths hanging open. I wanted to say something, to ask him if he was seeing it too, but I couldn't get the words out. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something too big. All I could do was stare. It wasn't making any noise. That was the weirdest part. Something that big, that close. It should have been loud, right? A low hum, a rush of wind, something. But there was nothing. Just silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, making them ring. I glanced at Derek. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and I knew he was as freaked out as I was. He finally whispered, "What the hell is that?" But I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just kept looking at the disc, half expecting it to do something, move, make a sound, anything. But it didn't. It just hung there, still and silent, like it was waiting. Then, after what felt like forever, it moved. Not slowly, not gradually. 1 second it was there, and the next it shot upward, leaving behind a faint trail of light that disappeared almost immediately. It was so fast I barely had time to register it, just gone, like it had never been there. Derek and I didn't move for a long time. We just stood there, frozen, staring at the spot where the disc had been. My hands were gripping the handlebars so tightly my knuckles hurt, but I couldn't let go. I was shaking, but I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from whatever the hell we'd just seen. Finally, Derek muttered, "We should go." His voice was shaky, and I could tell he was trying to sound calm, but it wasn't working. I nodded and pushed off, my legs moving on autopilot as we pedaled the rest of the way to his house. Neither of us said a word the entire ride. When we got to his driveway, we dumped our bikes on the grass and went inside. His parents were in the living room watching TV, and they barely looked up as we came in. We didn't tell them what we saw. I don't know why. Maybe we thought they wouldn't believe us, or maybe we just didn't want to say it out loud. Saying it out loud would make it real. That night, I slept in Derek's room, but I didn't get much sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over. The disc, the light, the way it disappeared so fast it made my head spin. I kept expecting to see it again, to look out the window and find it hovering over the house. But it didn't come back. The next morning, we didn't talk about it. Not really. Derek just said, "That was crazy, huh?" And I nodded. We left it at that. Years later, I brought it up to him, just to see if he remembered it the same way I did. He said he did, but there was something in his voice, hesitation maybe, or doubt, that made me wonder. He said it was probably just a weird plane or a weather balloon or something, but I could tell he didn't believe it. Not really. I've tried to convince myself it was something explainable, a trick of the light, a dream, a memory warped by time, but every time I close my eyes and think back to that night, I see it so clearly. The size of it, the brightness of the light, the way it didn't illuminate anything, the silence. It wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. And I can't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to see it. Even now, more than a decade later, I still get chills when I think about it. Sometimes, when I'm out at night and the sky is clear, I'll look up, half expecting to see it again. I haven't. Not yet. But I can't help wondering, what if it's still out there? What if it's waiting? And what if next time it doesn't leave so quietly? Redditor 5. I've never told anyone the full story. It's the kind of thing that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but every time I think about it, my stomach twists, and I get this nagging feeling that something about that day wasn't right, that it wasn't normal. It started in the wholesale flower district, one of my favorite places to wander when I had a free afternoon. I've always loved plants, not just your typical house plants, but the weird, exotic ones that look like they belong in another world. There's this little shop tucked between two warehouses where an old Chinese man sometimes sells me strange cuttings. He's never told me his name, and I've never asked. We have this unspoken arrangement: if he has something unusual, he shows it to me, and I usually buy it, no questions asked. That day, though, he didn't have anything special, just the usual roses, zinnias, and daisies stacked in buckets outside the shop. I was about to keep walking when it happened. The light dimmed so suddenly, I thought I was going blind. At first, I thought it was just a cloud passing over the sun, but then it got darker. Too dark. The kind of darkness that feels heavy, pressing against your skin like damp wool. I stopped in my tracks, squinting up at the sky. An eclipse. Total, absolute, and out of nowhere. The air seemed to thicken, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then came the sound. A low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest, growing louder and deeper until I thought my ribs might crack from the pressure. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a machine, not an animal. It was otherworldly. And just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light came rushing back, so bright I had to shield my eyes. I stood there, blinking, trying to shake the weird, buzzing sensation from my head. That's when I saw it. The plant? It was sitting there, tucked in among the buckets of zinnias like it had always been there. But I knew it hadn't been. I'd been standing there not 2 minutes before, and it wasn't there. I was sure of it. It wasn't like any plant I'd ever seen. Its leaves were thick and waxy, with an almost metallic sheen that caught the light in a way that didn't seem natural. The stem was a deep, bruised purple, and at the very top was a single bud, tightly closed and pulsing faintly, as though something inside it was alive. I turned to the old man. What? What is that? He shrugged, not even looking up from the flowers he was arranging. You want it? $1.95. Where did it come from? He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. Do you want it or not? I hesitated. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away, but there was something about the plant, something that called to me. Before I knew it, I was pulling 2 crumpled bills from my pocket and handing them over. He didn't even make change, just nodded and went back to his flowers. I carried the plant home in a plain brown paper bag, the stem sticking out of the top. On the subway, people stared at it. A man sitting across from me leaned forward, his brow furrowed. What is that? I'm not sure, I admitted. He didn't say anything else, just sat back and watched me with an uneasy look in his eyes. By the time I got home, the uneasiness had settled deep into my chest. I set the plant on my kitchen table and stared at it, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The bud was still pulsing, faintly but steadily, like the heartbeat of something sleeping. I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers brushed the waxy leaves, I felt a jolt, like static electricity. My hand snapped back, and a faint metallic taste filled my mouth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that low hum from the eclipse, felt it vibrating in my bones. I swear I even heard it in my apartment, faint and far away, like it was coming from the plant. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was imagining things. But when I finally got up to check on the plant, I froze in the doorway. The bud had opened. Not fully, just enough to reveal a glimpse of what was inside, a deep, inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light. It wasn't just a shadow. It was moving, swirling and shifting like smoke trapped in a jar. I wanted to throw it away, to grab the whole thing and toss it in the dumpster outside. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the thing, feeling that hum in my chest growing louder and louder until I thought it might split me in half. And then it stopped. The bud closed again, the hum faded, and the apartment was silent. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I'd made up my mind. The plant had to go. I didn't care how much I'd paid for it or how exotic it was. Whatever it wasn't natural and it wasn't safe. But when I went to throw it out, I couldn't find it. It wasn't on the table where I'd left it. It wasn't anywhere in the apartment. I tore the place apart, checked every room, every corner, every shadow. It was just gone. I haven't seen it since. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the air feels too heavy, I hear that hum again. Faint, far away, but unmistakable. And every time I hear it, I can't help but wonder, where did it go? And more importantly, will it come back? Redditor 6. I've always loved stargazing. There's something about looking at the night sky that makes everything else feel small, insignificant. Like no matter what's happening down here, out there, the stars just keep doing their thing, indifferent and eternal. That night was perfect for it. A clear evening, the kind where the air feels crisp and every star looks sharp against the velvet sky. My friend Matt and I had found a quiet spot just outside of town, lying on the hood of his old car, sharing a bag of chips and watching the universe spin above us. We weren't saying much, just pointing out constellations or trying to guess which planes were heading where, the kind of easy, comfortable silence you only have with someone you've known forever. I was staring at this one star, brighter than the rest, just sitting there in the middle of the sky. It caught my eye because of how steady it was. You know how stars sometimes twinkle, flickering like they're alive? This one didn't. It was solid, unwavering, like a pinprick of light punched into the fabric of the night. And then it moved. Not a little wobble, not a flicker. Moved. Slowly, steadily, it started sliding across the sky. My brain didn't register it at first. Stars don't move, right? Not like that. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that I'd stared too long and it was some weird optical illusion. But no matter how much I blinked or rubbed my eyes, it kept moving. A slow, deliberate glide that didn't stop. I didn't say anything at first. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Matt, that star's on a little joyride? It sounded stupid, and I didn't want him to think I was crazy. So I just watched, my heart thudding in my chest as it drifted across the sky, heading toward the horizon. It wasn't fast, not like a shooting star or a meteor streaking through the atmosphere. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. And it was quiet. No sound, no trails, just a single, steady point of light cutting through the night. Finally, it disappeared, slipped over the edge of the horizon, like a ship sinking below the sea. I was still staring at the spot where it vanished when Matt broke the silence. "Yo," he said, his voice low and a little shaky. "Did you just see that star moving?" Relief hit me like a wave. It wasn't just me. He'd seen it too. "Yeah," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I saw it." "What the hell was that?" he asked, sitting up and looking at me like I had the answers. But I didn't. I didn't have a clue. "It wasn't a plane," I said, thinking out loud. "Too high, too small, no blinking lights. It wasn't a satellite either. Those don't just disappear like that." "Maybe a drone?" he offered, but even he didn't sound convinced. A drone that high up wouldn't be a single steady light, and it wouldn't move like that. We both knew it, but neither of us wanted to say the other thing. The thing we were both thinking. We sat there in silence for a while, staring at the sky like it might come back, but it didn't. The other stars stayed where they were, twinkling innocently, like nothing had happened. On the drive home, we couldn't stop talking about it. Matt kept trying to rationalize it, throwing out every explanation he could think of. Military tech, a weather balloon, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, but none of it fit. The more we talked, the more we circled back to the same uncomfortable conclusion. Whatever it wasn't something we understood. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light, steady and unblinking, gliding across the sky like it had somewhere to be. I kept wondering where it went, what it was, if it was still out there somewhere, moving silently through the darkness. Even now, years later, I think about it. I've tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light or a weird reflection. But deep down, I know that's not true. I know what I saw. Sometimes on clear nights, I'll find myself looking up, scanning the sky for that same bright, steady light. I haven't seen it again, not yet, but I can't shake the feeling that if I ever do, I won't just watch it this time. I'll follow it. Redditor 7. I was 18, just a kid trying to figure out life, driving home from my late shift at the gas station. It was one of those nights where the world feels impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The road stretched out in front of me, straight as an arrow, flanked by endless fields that rolled out under the moonlight. It was past midnight, closer to 12:30 a.m., and I was dead tired. The kind of tired where your thoughts start to wander, where shadows on the roadside make you second-guess yourself. But that night, it wasn't shadows that caught my attention. It was the light. At first, I thought it was just the moon playing tricks on me, a glow, faint but steady, hovering low over the fields to my right. But as I got closer, it grew brighter, bigger, a massive golden orb floating just above the ground, lighting up the stalks of corn and the dark line of trees beyond. My heart started pounding, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I slowed the truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The light was mesmerizing, otherworldly. It didn't flicker or pulse. It just glowed, steady and blinding, like a second sun had fallen to earth. Before I knew it, I was pulling over to the side of the road. The engine hummed as I sat there, staring, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What the hell was it? A UFO? Some kind of experiment? My palms were sweaty and my chest felt tight, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I turned off the truck, leaving the headlights on, and opened the door. The cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel, and took a shaky step toward the edge of the road. The light shifted. Just a little, but enough to make me freeze. My heart was in my throat now, pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The orb seemed to tilt, angling slightly toward me, and for a moment I felt like it was looking at me, watching. My knees locked, and every instinct I had screamed at me to get back in the truck and drive. But I didn't. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away as the light turned again. This time the angle was sharper, and for the first time I could make out something. Letters. Goodyear. I blinked. Then blinked again. The letters were there, plain as day, printed in bold white against the glow. It wasn't an orb, it wasn't a UFO, it was a damn blimp. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I doubled over, laughing so hard I thought I might pass out. I couldn't stop. Tears streamed down my face as I stumbled back into the truck, my sides aching from the force of it. I cranked the engine, the sound of my laughter mixing with the rumble of the old pickup, and floored it out of there. The drive home was a blur, the kind of surreal, adrenaline-fueled haze that makes you feel like you're dreaming. I couldn't stop laughing, though. Every time I thought I was done, I'd remember the way my heart had nearly stopped, the sheer panic I'd felt, and it would start all over again. When I finally pulled into the driveway and shut off the truck, the house was dark. Everyone was asleep. I sat there for a while, the engine ticking as it cooled, staring out at the fields and replaying the moment in my head. The fear, the awe, the ridiculous, anticlimactic punchline. It was the kind of thing that felt too absurd to be real. But it was. And you know what? Even though it turned out to be just a blimp, part of me still remembers the way that light made me feel, that moment of pure, unfiltered wonder, the way the world seemed so much bigger, stranger, full of possibilities. I guess that's the funny thing about moments like that. Even when the mystery's gone, the feeling stays with you. And now, whenever I see a blimp, I can't help but laugh, because for one brief, unforgettable moment, I thought I was staring at something extraordinary. And maybe, in a way, I was. Redditor 8. I've had a lot of time to think about how to tell this story, and I always come back to the same problem. Nobody ever believes me. I get it. If someone told me they'd been abducted by creatures that looked like plungers with hands for heads, I'd laugh too. But I swear, every word I'm about to tell you is true. It started on a Friday night. I was sitting in my apartment, half watching some mindless TV show and scrolling through my phone. Nothing special, just another quiet night. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the dull chatter of the show I wasn't paying attention to. That's when the silence hit me. It wasn't gradual, like when the power cuts out. It was sudden, as if someone had pressed mute on the entire world. I glanced up, confused, and that's when the light appeared. It filled the room, brighter than anything I'd ever seen, yet it didn't hurt to look at. My heart pounded, my body frozen in place. I wanted to move, to hide, to do something, but I couldn't. The light seemed to press down on me, heavy and warm, and before I could make sense of what was happening, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The room I found myself in was smooth and sterile, the walls shimmering faintly, like they were alive. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the floor beneath me was warm, almost unnervingly so. My first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room was featureless, a perfect, seamless dome. Then they came in. The first thing I noticed was the sound. This faint, wet squelching, like suction cups peeling off glass. They glided into the room, their chrome-like bodies gleaming under the soft light. They looked like plungers, sleek and tubular, with no arms or legs. But their heads were hands. Perfectly formed, with 5 long fingers and a massive blinking eye in the middle of the palm. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what I was seeing. One of them raised its head, and the eye blinked slowly, almost lazily, at me. It didn't speak, but I felt it. This gentle pressure against my temples, like fingers brushing against my mind. Images began to form in my head, strange and incomprehensible at first, but they quickly arranged themselves into something I could understand. They were showing me their planet, a sprawling world of impossible architecture and alien skies. They were explaining their purpose, their fascination with creatures like me. I was in their zoo. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some random abduction. I wasn't some unlucky victim plucked out of the blue. To them, I was an exhibit, a rare specimen to be observed and studied. My stomach churned as I tried to grasp the reality of it, but before I could react, the room shifted. In an instant, I was somewhere else entirely. It looked like an apartment, a nice one, actually. Clean, modern furniture, a big window that overlooked a surreal alien landscape, and a kitchen stocked with food that I didn't recognize, but instinctively knew was for me. The plungers had placed me here, in this artificial habitat, like some kind of cosmic terrarium. The first few days were a blur. I paced the apartment, occasionally shouting at the empty air, demanding answers. But the plungers didn't respond. They just watched, their unblinking eyes peering in from the edges of my consciousness. I tried everything I could think of to escape, smashing furniture, throwing things at the walls, even trying to climb out the window. But nothing worked. The walls were unbreakable, the window an illusion, and I quickly realized there was no way out. I don't know how much time passed before they brought her in. I was sitting on the couch, staring at the swirling purple sky outside, when the light shifted again. She appeared in the middle of the room, dazed and disoriented, her designer clothes rumpled and her expression one of pure confusion. It didn't take me long to recognize her. She was a celebrity, a PR star who'd graced 100 magazine covers and commercials. I couldn't believe my eyes. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp and panicked. I tried to explain as best I could, but the words sounded ridiculous even to me. She didn't believe me at first. Why would she? But when the plungers glided into the room, their eyeless bodies looming over us, she went pale. The pressure against my temples returned, and I felt another wave of images flood my mind. They were showing us together, living in the apartment, smiling, happy. They wanted us to mate. The plungers were trying to ensure the survival of our species, as if we were some endangered animals they needed to breed. She was furious, of course. I can't say I blamed her. She screamed at them, threw a chair, even tried to attack one of them, but they didn't react. They just blinked at her, unflinching. And eventually, She slumped to the floor in defeat. Over time, we adjusted. What else could we do? The apartment was comfortable, the food sustaining, and we had each other. We became friends, then something more. I won't pretend it was a fairy tale romance. It was born out of desperation and survival, but it was real. We clung to each other, a lifeline in an alien world. We never stopped planning our escape. It took months, maybe years, but we learned the plunger's patterns, their weaknesses. They weren't as omniscient as they seemed, and one night, when the moment was right, we made our move. It was messy, terrifying, and I still don't know how we pulled it off, but somehow, we stole one of their ships and made it back to Earth. Life hasn't been the same since. We've tried to go back to normal, but it's impossible. We know what's out there, what's watching. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that faint squelching sound in my dreams, and I'll wake up in a cold sweat. We escaped their zoo, but I can't help but feel like it's not over. They let us go too easily. And one day, I think they'll come back. Redditor 9. I will never forget the summer of 2009. It wasn't supposed to be anything extraordinary, just a week-long Christian camp where I'd been hired to play drums for the evening masses. I wasn't particularly religious, but the gig was easy, the company was decent, and the peaceful setting, a small camp nestled deep in the woods with a lake at its center, was a nice break from my usual routine. Each night, after the music and speeches were done, the air would grow quieter as the kids drifted off to their bunks. But a small group of us, curious and restless, took to heading down to the lake after the evening mass. It became our ritual, sitting by the water, talking about nothing, staring up at the stars. The first time we saw it, we were caught completely off guard. It looked like a star at first, small, steady, unremarkable. Then it started to move. Not in a straight line like a satellite, but in complex looping patterns, zigzagging and spiraling in a way that defied logic. We sat there, transfixed, trying to make sense of it. Some said it had to be a satellite. Others joked that it was an alien craft. But no matter what we thought, we couldn't deny one thing. It didn't move like anything we'd ever seen. When the others went to bed that night, I stayed behind, watching. I couldn't pull myself away. Hours passed, and just as I decided to leave, the light disappeared behind a cloud. I stood there for a moment, disappointed. Then it reappeared, brighter and closer, like it was saying goodbye. Then it vanished again. The next night, we returned to the lake, hopeful, and sure enough, the light was back. It danced across the sky, weaving patterns that seemed almost deliberate. By the third night, our group had grown, 6 of us sitting by the water, craning our necks, waiting for the now expected show. But what happened that night was different. Unnervingly different. It began like before, with someone pointing out the light as it moved through the sky. This time, though, it was much closer. The first few nights, it had seemed far off, maybe just outside the atmosphere. But now it was low, skimming closer to the ground, moving deliberately and smoothly. From where we sat, we could see it more clearly, a round object casting a pale, almost silvery light that illuminated the treetop. Its movement was strange, purposeful, like it was searching for something. The beam of light it emitted was long and cigar-shaped, sweeping across the trees and the water in wide arcs. Everyone fell silent, the tension thick as we watched it glide through the night. Suddenly, it disappeared behind a thick line of trees about 100 meters away. No one said a word. We just sat there, straining our eyes, waiting. Then, without warning, it reappeared, this time directly across the lake, hovering just above the water. That's when everything changed. The light shifted, turning toward us. A pale, shimmering beam swept over the lake, casting its reflection onto the rippling water. It was bright enough to light up the trees around us, illuminating our faces like we were standing under a spotlight. It wasn't just close now. It was watching us. That much was clear. I remember the stillness most of all. It didn't make a sound. No hum, no engine. No whirring blades. Just silence. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Even the lake seemed unnaturally calm, the usual ripples frozen under the beam of light. It hovered there for what felt like an eternity, but in reality it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. Then, Without warning, it shot upward, accelerating so fast it was gone in an instant. One moment it was there, and the next it was a streak of light disappearing into the stars. No human aircraft moves like that. Nothing I know of does. The silence hung heavy after it was gone. No one spoke at first. We just stared at the spot where it had been, our minds racing, trying to comprehend what we just witnessed. Finally, one of the younger kids broke the silence. "What was that?" he asked, his voice trembling. No one had an answer. We stayed out by the lake for hours after that, too wired to sleep, replaying the moment in our heads, sharing theories. Some insisted it had to be some kind of advanced military drone, but even that explanation felt hollow. There was no sound, no wind, no trace of anything man-made. Whatever it wasn't from here. The next morning, the camp went on as if nothing had happened. We didn't tell the other campers. They wouldn't have believed us anyway. But the 6 of us knew the truth. We'd seen something extraordinary, something we couldn't explain, and it had left an indelible mark on us. Even now, years later, I can't look at the night sky without thinking about that light. I still hear its silence in my dreams, still feel the weight of its beam on my skin. I don't know what it was or where it came from, but one thing is certain, the truth is out there, and for a few unforgettable nights, it found us. Redditor 10. I've never believed in aliens. Not the gray, big-owned kind from the X-Files, not the anal-probing rednecks in a field kind, and definitely not the shimmering angels and UFOs cults plaster all over Venice Beach. But what happened on October 17, 2007 in Sausalito? That wasn't aliens. It was worse. It was something that didn't bother to hide. Something that wanted us to see. It was our anniversary, me and Claire, 7 years. We'd booked a table at the Anchovy, this bougie seafood spot perched on a dock over Richardson Bay. You know the type. White tablecloths, candles in mason jars, waiters who describe scallops like they're reciting poetry. The sky was clear that night, the kind of crisp October air that makes you believe in basic things. Gravity, sunrise, the permanence of the Golden Gate Bridge glowing red in the distance. We'd just gotten our wine, a overpriced Pinot that tasted like wet oak, when the screaming started. Not screaming, gasping. A collective inhale, like the whole deck had been punched in the gut. Claire dropped her fork. What the hell? Then I saw them. Lights. Dozens of them. Not planes, not helicopters. These were things. Smooth, oval-shaped, each glowing a different color. Cobalt blue, poison green, a deep maroon that made my eyes ache. They moved in a pattern, precise as a ballet, zipping horizontally, stopping dead, then darting upward so fast they left afterimages burned into the dark. One shot past the moon, and for a second I saw its silhouette. No wings, no windows, just a sleek, featureless shell. "Drones?" Claire whispered, but her voice cracked. The man at the next table, a silver-habled tech bro in a Patagonia vest, snorted. "Drones in 2007? Please, that's military. Has to be." But the lights didn't care about our theories. They kept dancing, closer now, close enough to hear the sound, or lack of it. No engines, no rotors, just a faint hum, like a refrigerator vibrating through a wall. The hair on my arms stood up. Then the colors began to bleed. The blue light rippled, streaking the sky like wet paint. The green one pulsed, sending waves across the bay that lit up the water in bioluminescent swirls. A toddler at the bar started crying, clutching her mother's leg. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Claire gripped my hand. Her palm was slick. We should go. But we didn't. None of us did. We were moths, hypnotized. The lights clustered suddenly, forming a perfect circle. For 10 seconds they hung there, silent. Then, one by one, they shot upward. Straight up, vanishing into the black, like reverse meteorites. The last one, the maroon one, lingered. It dipped low, so low I could see the bay's reflection in its surface. No, not a reflection. The water beneath it was boiling. Fish floated belly up, their scales glowing faintly green. A sea lion thrashed, barking in short, panicked bursts, before going still. The light pulsed once, as if satisfied, then streaked into the stars. The restaurant exploded into chatter. Waiters tripped over each other, spilling drinks. The tech bro was filming with a flip phone, shouting, "You seeing this? You seeing this?" Claire's face was pale. Let's just get the check." We paid and left. The parking lot was chaos. Cars honking, people standing on roofs pointing. The Bay Area doesn't do silence, but that night, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. The bridge was worse. We took the long way back to San Francisco, crawling over the Golden Gate in bumper-to-bumper traffic. Claire had the radio on, some alt-rock station, but all the songs kept cutting to static. "Probably the lights," she muttered, jabbing the power button. That's when I saw the crowd. A dozen cars had pulled over on the southbound side. People leaned against the railing, phones out, staring east. The view from the stage bordered the river and made it look like a picture such screen printers did not. Claire rolled down her window. "What's going on?" A woman in a Giants jersey turned, her face lit orange. "Angel Island's on fire." I craned my neck. Sure enough, across the black water, Angel Island, the chunk of state park where they let tourists play pioneer for a weekend, was glowing. Not the warm campfire glow you'd expect. This was violent, hungry. Flames clawed halfway up the hillside, painting the bay in hellish streaks. Claire frowned. "But you can't light fires there, right?" "You can't," I said. The rules were drilled into every Bay Area kid. No open flames, no smoking, rangers patrolling till sundown. We inched closer. Fireboats raced across the water, hoses arcing uselessly. The smoke was wrong, thick and oily, stinging my eyes even from a mile away. A CHP officer waved us past, his face streaked with soot. "Keep moving, now!" At home, we left the TV on all night. Every channel showed the same helicopter footage. Angel Island burning, firemen shouting over radios, "It's not responding to water." By dawn, the anchor said the cause was under investigation, but his smile was too tight. Claire fell asleep on the couch. I didn't. The next morning, the news mentioned the lights, just once. Unconfirmed reports of aerial phenomena over the North Bay last night. Officials remind viewers that military exercises are common in the area. Claire threw her spoon into her cereal. "Aerial phenomena?" "They looked right at them." I didn't answer. I was staring at my laptop. The forums were blowing up. Bay Area UFO sightings, October 17th.10.b. Page after page of nearly identical stories. Sausalito, Tiburon, even a ferry captain who swore the lights dove under his boat. But the comments that stuck with me were the ones from Angel Island, a hiker named @TrailMixQueen. Me and my boyfriend were camping near Battery Wallace. Saw the lights first, purple ones, real low, then the trees started vibrating, like a tuning fork. We ran for the ferry, but the dock was gone, just gone. Had to swim. When I looked back, the whole ridge was on fire. Another from @Marvin43. "I'm a retired firefighter. That wasn't no brush fire." The flames were blue at the base. Blue. And the smoke. It moved against the wind. Claire peeked over my shoulder. "Don't. Just don't." But I couldn't stop. 3 days later, the island reopened. No press conference, no answers, just a terse email from Park Services. All trails are safe for public use. Claire refused to go. "You're being paranoid," she said, but her voice shook. I went alone. The ferry ride was empty. Fog hung low, swallowing Alcatraz whole. The ranger at the dock didn't make eye contact. "Stay on marked paths." The burn zone started halfway up Mount Caroline Livermore. I expected charred trees, ashy soil. Instead, the ground was crystallized. Shiny, black glass crunched under my boots. The air smelled sharp, chemical, like a nail salon. And the silence? No birds, no bugs. Just the crunch, crunch, crunch of my steps. I found the tree near the summit. It was the only one left standing. A massive oak, its trunk split open like a gutted fish. Inside, something glinted. Metal? I reached in. Bzz, my hand jerked back. A static shock? No, deeper. My bones hummed. That's when I saw the symbol, carved into the bark, fresh and oozing sap. A circle with 3 slashes through it, not knife marks, too precise, like a brand. My phone rang, unknown number. I answered, nothing but a low, oscillating tone. Then a voice, if you could call it that, garbled, distorted like a radio tuned between stations. "You shall not speak." The call dropped. Claire left a week later. "You're obsessed," she said, shoving clothes into a suitcase. It was lights, a fire, let it go. I didn't tell her about the tree, the calls, the nightmares where the maroon light peels back my ceiling and shows me things. Floating bodies in the bay, their skin glassy and cracked. The bridge collapsing in slow motion, cars tumbling like toys. I didn't tell her about the men in suits either. They started showing up last month. Black sedans parked outside my apartment. One followed me to Safeway, lingered in the cereal aisle. When I confronted him, he smiled, too wide, too many teeth, and said, "You saw the dancers, didn't you?" I ran. Yesterday, I found the symbol again, scratched into my bathroom mirror. Same circle, same 3 slashes. The glass was warm to the touch. Tonight, the lights are back. Not over the bay, outside my window. Blue, green, maroon. They don't dance this time. They wait. Redditor 11. I still remember those summers in the 60s when our family would pack up and head out to Giant Rock. Back then, the world was buzzing with stories of UFOs, and the desert air around the rock felt alive with mystery. We'd fly in from Torrance, California, in Grandpa's old Cessna, the little plane rattling like it might come apart at any moment, but we always made it. The UFO conventions were something else entirely. It was a mix of scientists, believers, skeptics, and the downright eccentric, all gathered under that big desert sky to talk about the unknown. I was just a kid, but the energy of those gatherings stuck with me. Later, when the convention stopped, my family and I still made the trip out there, chasing that sense of wonder. The desert had a way of making you feel small, like anything could happen out there, and one night, it did. It was one of those perfect desert nights, the air still and cool, the stars so bright you felt like you could reach out and touch them. My mom, dad, 2 aunts, my brother and I were sprawled out on the rocks, craning our necks to stare at the sky. My brother and I were passing binoculars back and forth, searching for anything unusual among the constellations. "See anything yet?" Dad asked, his voice low and amused. He didn't really believe in UFOs, not the way Mom did, but he humored us, letting us stay up late and spin wild theories about aliens and flying saucers. "Nope," I said, lowering the binoculars. "Just stars." "Keep looking," Mom said. "They're out there, you just have to be patient." I remember the sound of the crickets, the occasional rustle of wind through the sparse bushes, the distant howl of a coyote, the kind of silence you only find in the desert. It made you feel exposed, like the whole universe was watching. And then the stars disappeared. It started slowly. One moment, the sky was filled with constellations, twinkling and endless. The next, a section of them went dark, as though someone had taken an enormous eraser to the sky. My brother noticed it first. "Hey," he said, nudging me, "look at that." "What?" I asked, annoyed, until I followed his gaze and saw it. A massive shadow moving across the sky, blotting out the stars as it went. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Everyone else went quiet. I could hear my mom's sharp intake of breath, my dad muttering something under his breath. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't anything man-made. It didn't make a sound, not even the faint hum of an engine or the rush of displaced air. It just moved. Slow, steady, deliberate. From west to east, it cruised across the sky, enormous and silent. "Is that a cloud?" my aunt asked, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Clouds didn't move like that, and they didn't blot out the stars in such a clean, perfect line. I tried to make sense of it, but my brain couldn't. It was too big, too impossible. Whatever it was, it had to be massive, miles wide, maybe more. It stretched across the sky, a vast, featureless shadow that seemed to swallow the world as it passed over us. No one spoke. No one moved. We just sat there, staring up, our breaths caught in our throats. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, the kind of primal fear that comes from knowing you're in the presence of something you can't comprehend. And then, just as silently as it had appeared, it was gone. The stars came back, twinkling innocently as though nothing had happened. The night was still, the crickets chirping again, the desert resuming its quiet rhythm. "What the hell was that?" Dad finally said, his voice shaky. No one answered. What could we say? For the rest of the night, we stayed out there, watching the sky, but nothing else happened. Whatever it was, it didn't come back. We didn't talk much about it afterward, not because we didn't want to, but because there was no way to explain it. We all saw the same thing, but trying to describe it felt impossible. Too big, too silent, too otherworldly. It was like trying to explain a dream, something so vivid in the moment but impossible to capture in words. I've spent years thinking about that night. Sometimes I wonder if it was some experimental aircraft, a secret project hidden from the public. But deep down, I don't believe that. It didn't move like a machine. It moved like it knew we were there, watching it, and it didn't care. Even now, when I look up at the stars, I think about that shadow, that vast, silent thing that blotted out the night. I wonder where it came from, what it was doing, and if it's still out there, cruising silently through the heavens. Whatever it was, I know one thing for sure. We weren't alone that night.